Hey everyone, this is the special project I was telling you about. Taking in kind of a comparison and in-depth look at one of the most popular children's book series of all time, the Berenstain Bears. Now, you might look at me and you say, what's a person like him reading, why is a person like him reading the Berenstain Bears? Well, let me kind of explain. You see, ever since I was a young kid, just like many of you, I've enjoyed the Berenstain Bears. As a matter of fact, I remember watching the 1985 series when it first originally aired on CBS on Saturday mornings. And then rewatching it about 15, 18 years later when it got re-aired in syndication on Saturday and Sunday mornings thanks to Dig Entertainment. I also remember watching, in fact, it was most recently, and it's still being aired on Sprout and PBS stations all over, the revitalized Berenstain Bears. The revitalized versions are more directly from the books, with some original stories here and there, but mostly directly from the books. And it doesn't matter what books it was. Most of the stories, yes, were based off the first-time books, while others were actually based and loosely adapted off the easy step into the reading books, while some are also loosely adapted from the big chapter books. And that's the comparison I want to do today, comparing the big chapter books to what we have watched recently with the 2003 series. So, where do we begin? Well, let me show you the big chapter book series. Now, I previously probably talked about these in another video. But the big chapter book series is basically a book series like this. As you can read the titles from here, this one is called the Bermuda Triangle. And you can see, look what the cover is. Now you might think to yourself, as a longtime Berenstain Bear fan, that I've never actually heard of that story. Well, believe it or not, these books have actually been out since about 1993. That's right. And this story was published in 1997. Now, what exactly does it have to deal with? Well, that's where one other story comes in first. Because you see, this sort of serves like a sequel to another story that the big chapter book series got introduced by. The New Girl in Town. Now, the New Girl in Town basically introduced the character right here of Bonnie Brown. Now, Bonnie Brown, we find out, is the niece of Squire Grizzly. Of Squire and Lady Grizzly, that is. And she ends up befriending Brother Bear, after Brother, of course, ends up getting a crush on her the first time he sees her. And because of this, not only does she befriend him, but she helps him get over his shyness towards girls and his embarrassment of always having crushes on girls. But why does this serve as a sequel to this? Because it mentions some of the things that took place in the first book. Like, one of the things that takes place in this book is a play called Romeo and Juliet. Basically, Bonnie and Brother are the lead roles, Romeo and Juliet, and this play kind of helps stop a feud between the Grizzlies and the Bears. It's referenced here because there's a new cub that comes to town called Bermuda. Bermuda is actually the cousin of another character that has been seen not only in the big chapter book series, has also been seen in the first time book series, making her debut in the first time book series book called The In Crowd, as well as being seen in the Trick or Treat book. But that character is none other than Queenie McBear. This character right here, if you could see her. Now, Queenie McBear has also been recently seen in the PBS revival of the Berenstain Bears. But there's a difference. So let's start with talking about these characters. And let's start off by talking about Queenie. Now, who is Queenie? Why do I want to start this comparison off with her? Well, like I said, Queenie debuted originally in the first-time book series, The In Crowd. This story was loosely adapted onto the PBS series, but Queenie's role was replaced by someone else. And just like this character that replaced Queenie in the role in the PBS adaptation, Queenie had basically, bullied her way or basically intimidated Sister and took away a lot of Sister's friends because she knew of all the latest trends and fashions. Now, however, after that, Queenie did admit that maybe she was a little jealous and upset that she couldn't do some of the things that Sister could. So in the end, she does get befriended. Now, in the PBS series, she's one of Sister's closest friends. As a matter of fact, she actually shares a class with Sister. But that's where the comparison comes in. You see, in the Big Chapter Book series, she's not in Sister's class. No, Queenie McBear is actually in Brother Bear's class. That's right. She's in Brother Bear's class, which means she's older and she's in the 5th grade. Brother is actually depicted as a 5th to 6th grader here, and that's exactly what Queenie is, a 5th to 6th grader in the Big Chapter Book series. However, in the PBS series, and I think in some of the first-time books, Queenie is actually depicted as being in Sister's class. So you might ask yourself, where is the comparison? What's the difference? Well, the difference is that since the Big Chapter Book series was created for older readers that were getting out of the first-time book series, there's no doubt that Queenie, being in Brother Bear's class, was to help bring in the female readers. Now, true, Sister and Lizzie, those characters brought them in too, but when it came to an older, more understanding, like flirtatious kind of deal, when it came to like boys and everything, Queenie ended up being in Brother's class. But you know what's funny about this? One of the Big Chapter books that was loosely adapted by PBS into an episode was called The Nerdy Nephew. And basically it introduced the character of Furry Factual, the nephew of Actual Factual. Now you might ask yourself, what does this have to do with the whole scenario? Well, it has a lot to do. You see, Queenie, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Had to let the cat into the garage. But anyway, as I was saying, and asking, what does this have to do with the comparison? What's the difference? Well, believe it or not, in the PBS adaptation of Nerdy Nephew, where we, like I say, are introduced to Furry Factual, there's a scene where Queenie is actually in Brother's class. That's right. I'm not lying. You have to watch the episode yourself. But she's actually in Brother's class. How can that be? How is it for most of the PBS series, she's in Sister's class, but in this episode, she's in Brother's. Just as she is in the Big Chapter Book series. How is that? Well, I'll tell you how it is. You see, the creators didn't really want to confuse any of the fans. See, the fans of the Big Chapter books that read The Nerdy Nephew saw Queenie as the one that was using him And Queenie, just like Ferdy, was in, as I said, in Brother's class. So the only way it would work, and this is just my theory on it, is they actually had to go by what the book was. So they had to put Queenie into the class, even though for most of the PBS series, she's in Sister's class. I know that sounds confusing, but it's true. It's true. It's really true. She basically had to be put into Sister's. I mean, for this one episode, she had to be put in Brother's class. I mean, they did not have any older female cubs in the series to take Queenie's place like they did in the in crowd. And quite honestly, I can't really blame them, because I think I know what's going on. I think I know what's going on as a fan. I think what's happened with a character like Queenie, because she mentions at the end of Ferdy in this episode that the reason she was only pretending to be his friend before she officially became his friend, and that's a little weird, isn't it? Pretending and officially, before she officially became a friend, was telling him the only reason she pretended to like him was because her marks were down, her grades were down, just like Too Tall. Get where the connection's going? See, just like Bonnie Brown, not to get off the subject here, but just like Bonnie Brown is the best friend in the Big Chapter Book series to Brother, Queenie is the best friend in the Big Chapter Book series and sometimes in the PBS series to Too Tall, because they can understand each other. But anyway, it's kind of, but I think I understand what's going on. See, the Bear Country School is depicted as a school that's sort of, how do I say, different. It's like the classes they're in, it's like the third grade classes are all cut up into different subjects. Not saying there's no school out there nowadays that are like that, but it's like every school, but it's like every class is every hour is a different subject. So it makes me wonder, and this is just my opinion, that perhaps the character of Queenie McBear is depicted as a character that for most of the series, she's stuck in Teacher Jane's class, which is Sister Bear's class, but because she shows strength in some other areas, that perhaps for certain hours she's in a 4th grade class, and perhaps in other hours she's in a 5th grade class. I know it sounds kind of weird and kind of crazy, but it's just the way it is. And that's my dryer going off. But anyway, getting back to Queenie. What is different between her and her PBS counterpart? What's the difference? Well, her PBS counterpart is sort of similar in many ways. She hangs out, there are occasions she hangs out with Too Tall and the gang, no doubt about that. But there's something else. The biggest difference is, unlike her PBS counterpart, the Big Chapter Book version of Queenie, as I mentioned at the beginning, is flirtatious. That's right. She's a very flirtatious cub. In other words, she's into boys. Not only is she into the latest fashions and everything, as we could probably see in Papa's Pizza, because in Papa's Pizza, when she kind of counteracts one of her friend's suggestions for what to eat at a party, she says that suggestion, which I think was egg sandwiches or something like that, she says it's so old-fashioned, and that spaghetti's more up to it, it's more modern. So in other words, there is a little bit of that in there. But her character here is more flirtatious. But her character, but the major difference, like I was saying, is her Big Chapter Books version is more like that and more flirtatious. As a matter of fact, it's depicted in this book here that she has flirted with every boy in school, although she's with Too Tall, just to make him jealous. And she's also flirted with, you guessed it, Brother Bear, to definitely make Too Tall jealous. So basically, that's the major difference. That's the huge major difference right there. She's a very, I mean, overall, in both versions, in both the big chapter book series and the PBS series, she's friendly, she's a friendly, kind-hearted cub, very sweet and everything. But the biggest difference is in the PBS series, she's more of the kind-hearted kind. She's more of a kind-hearted person, and she's not flirtatious. But in the big chapter book series, she is. And that's the first comparison. That's the first comparison here on this project, and that is the difference between Queenie and her PBS counterpart. The biggest difference is the fact that in the big chapter books, she's flirtatious, and that's about it. Oh, and she's into boys. Who do I talk about next? How about how about Brother Bear? All right, now for comparison number 2. None other than everyone's favorite cub, Brother Bear. Now I'm sure a lot of people like Sister, and I'll get into it in a little bit too. But Brother Bear's difference between the PBS series and the Big Chapter Book series is not that much of a difference. I mean, he's still the same cub every way, in each way, even in the first-time book series. But there's a difference. There is a huge, huge difference. See, Brother actually has a love interest in the Big Chapter Book series. In the PBS series, he doesn't have any love interest. Well, of course, that's because the PBS series is aimed towards a younger audience. But the truth is, he doesn't have no love interest. Now, if you look back in the '85 series, he did sort of have a love interest in Honey Bear. But that was it. That was it. That's all. That's the only love interest he ever had. And true, it's kind of hinted every now and then in the first-time book series that he might have some girls interested in him. But in the Big Chapter Book series, Brother Bear does have a love interest, as I mentioned earlier, in Bonnie Brown. But as I mentioned earlier, Bonnie is actually seen as Brother's best friend. The only reason she's seen as a love interest is because, as mentioned in the Bermuda Triangle, there is just enough romantic feeling between the two as best friends to cause some jealousy. For example, it's in here somewhere, if I can find it. If not, I apologize. But there's a story called The Big Day. And like I said, if I can't find it, I apologize. It's sort of buried. I got these all organized. But unfortunately, I can't find it. But anyway, The Big Day, basically, what happens in this book is Bonnie is set up on a date with another rich cub. Now, she doesn't really want to go on this date, but she does it anyway out of respect for her parents and her uncle and her aunt. Brother finds out about this. Brother doesn't like it at all because of the fact that she's going out with another cub besides him. Now, Brother goes as far as to kind of teaming with Too Tall to pull a prank on this rich cub. But unfortunately, the prank backfires, and the prank ends up on Bonnie, kind of injuring that relationship at first. But later on, they do make up when Bonnie finds out that the cub she's dating actually just likes to be like her. You know, like a normal cub, nothing to do with richness or anything like that. So in the end of The Big Date, Brother and Bonnie's friendship still stays intact. But just like this was a sequel to this, it's also sort of a sequel to the, well, It's sort of a sequel, if you will, or I guess you could say a different version of the big date. Because in this version, it's Bonnie that gets jealous and not brother. Because Bonnie, like I said, has never been jealous of anything in her life until the Bermuda thing happened. But anyway, I'll get into Bonnie later on. But anyway, that's just the same thing as in the big date. And the same thing could be said in the story right here called Gotta Dance. In Gotta Dance, brother gets a little upset at the fact that he doesn't know how to dance yet. And that he wants to, and that deep down he wants to learn to dance. He wants to learn to dance so he can go to the spring dance with Bonnie. But there's a rumor going around. A rumor that Bonnie might be going with Two-Tone. But we find out that that rumor is actually false. We find out that Bonnie made that rumor up so that it would probably encourage brother to start dancing so she can go with him. But unfortunately, it's backfired. But Bonnie's very understanding of this, by saying she'd rather give up being named the best dancer in the dance and instead go out with brother to the mall, to a movie, or whatever. So in the end, it does encourage brother to take up ballet lessons, if you will, as well as learning in secret with the ballet teacher the latest pop moves. You get what I'm saying? So in the end, brother and Bonnie do end up both winning prizes at the dance for the dances, original and solo. But what does this have to do with brother? Well, like I said, this book shows that he has a little bit of jealousy because he's jealous at the fact that he believes that if he doesn't know how to learn to dance, Bonnie will go with Two-Tone and she'll probably end up being with Two-Tone as a girlfriend. That's the jealousy part. He doesn't want to see that happen. See, brother's character compared to his PBS series is that when it comes to girls, especially someone like a Bonnie Brown, he doesn't want to see her with anybody else but him. That's how he sees it. That's basically how he sees it, and that's how she sees it. But there's another thing about brother that's different in comparison to the PBS series. And it's got to do with this story, Gotta Dance. You see, in the PBS edition of Gotta Dance, and their loosely adapted story, it's not Bonnie brother has to dance with. No. It's actually Mama Bear. That's right, it's Mama he's got to dance with. See, Mama and Papa basically have a tradition of starting out, I can't remember what it is, sort of like an annual fall festival or something like that, with the dance routine. Now, Papa gets too busy and gets so caught up and busy setting up the set that he barely has time to practice with Mama. So both him and Mama come up with an idea. They both ask brother, hey look, since Papa's got to work on the set and won't have that much time, can you, brother, at least help me, Mama Bear, continue to practice? Because she needs a partner. And since Papa's already got it down pat, she just needs somebody to help her practice. So brother, reluctantly, who says he doesn't know how to dance, just like in this book, says, okay, fine, I'll do it. And finds out that he ends up enjoying it. All because the dance moves that Mama is teaching him are actually very similar to sports moves. Like hockey, swimming, hitting, you name it. So he ends up enjoying it. And then the night of the dance festival, or whatever it is, comes up, and everybody's ready to go. Papa's just put the finishing touches on the set, and just as he's ready to go out there with Mama, guess what happens? Well, you're close on probably what you're thinking. But what happens is Papa actually gets a board stuck to his foot here. That's right, he gets a board stuck to his foot, so he can't go out and dance. So what happens? Mama has to basically go out and basically decides that she has to go out and tell the people that her and Papa aren't going to do the annual dance. But, ta-da! Here comes Brother, I guess you could say, to the rescue. Brother, feeling as though his mama taught him so much about dancing and not giving up, that he decides, no, Mama, you're going to do this dance, and I'm going to do it with you. So basically, Brother takes Papa's place in the dance. And how's that loosely adapted off of this? Well, there's many loose adaptations of it. One, the teacher here, who is known as Miss Berenstain, I guess you can say, Madame Berenstain, takes the place of Mama in the book. In the book, she agrees to teach Brother the latest pop moves if he will agree to be in the recital. And the reason she wants to teach him she agrees to do this? So just like Mama needed Brother to be there for her, he can learn the latest dance moves to dance with Barney in time for the spring dance. But as far as comparisons go, like I say, overall, Brother's still the same character and everything, with a few exceptions. And next up, we're going to talk about, well, let's talk about Sister Bear, shall we? Hey everyone, we're ready for comparison number 3. You know, the one character that's associated with Brother in many ways is his sister Bear. Is his sister, Sister Bear. Now, you might be saying to yourself, what are the differences between Sister in the Big Chapter Book series and the PBS series? Well, just like with Brother, Sister is the same character overall in all 3 scenarios. She's the same character in the First Time Book series, same character in the PBS series, and the same character in the Big Chapter Book series. But just like Brother, there are a few differences. For example, there's a story in the Big Chapter Book series that basically has Sister being put, along with her best friend Lizzie, being put into Brother Bear's class. That's right. And that, if you think about it, goes back to what I was talking about with Queenie in the PBS in her PBS version. But anyway, the thing about Sister that makes her a little that kind of makes her different from her PBS series in the First Time Book series. In the Big Chapter Books, she acts a little bit more mature. True, she acts the same way, like I said, but she acts a little bit more mature, like she understands more. For example, in this story, The Love Match, where they try to pair up Bertha Bear with Milton Chubb, basically in this quotation, which we see here, when Brother tells Sister that it should be any day now that the coach Grismeyer will get word as if they're in the wrestling league or not, he tells him if the answer ends up being yes, then Bertha won't have any time for Milton. But here's something you don't normally hear out of a young 3rd, 4th grader. And that is, Sister quote says, please. Sister Bear's first rule of romance. That's a little different, isn't it? If a girl really likes a boy, she'll make time for him. And in the end, it basically says that brother is a little impressed, asked about at that, because it seems to him that his little sister was growing up. In other words, it's basically saying, that one little line there is saying that, well, sister understands, is mature enough in these books, I should say, to understand that if a girl like Bertha likes someone like Milton, or if a girl like Bonnie likes brother, but they have other activities, they will always find time to be with that person. It makes sense, doesn't it? And in the end, sister ends up being right, because Bertha does end up finding time to be with Milton and all. Anyway, like I said, the biggest difference is the fact that Sister Bear acts a lot more mature than she does in the first 10 book series. As a matter of fact, the maturity actually shows up a little bit in the PBS series, if not a lot. So that's the only similarity there. Yeah, besides her just being herself. The maturity level, which is unbelievable. But what are the other differences? Well, like I said, there's not many differences. Not many. But there are some there. Like I said, the love match is a good example. There's other examples. As a matter of fact, like I said here in the red, it's called the red-handed thief. And as we could see, Sister Bear ends up in the same class as brother and the others. Believe it or not. Sister and Lizzie, that is. And that's another thing that's similar. Like I said, there's not much difference between Sister and all three in the three areas that she's most known for. Even the 85 series, she's still the same way. But like I said, the biggest difference is the maturity level and the understanding of things that normally a third grader or fourth grader really wouldn't understand. I mean, what she said here, and then and then her helping her brother. Wow. In this book, she basically tells her brother, hey, look, my teacher knows all about the latest pop moves. She can teach you tree stuff. So you get the idea. So basically, you get the idea, right, of what I'm saying? Basically, there's not many differences between sisters. In fact, she's probably the only exception, except for the maturity and the understanding of things that normally third and fourth graders really wouldn't understand. And that's all I can really say about Sister Bear. Next up, how about we talk about the character I mentioned around brother, Bonnie Brown. Hey everyone, welcome to the second comparison between the books and the PBS series is possibly the other ones. Now, this one I want to talk about a character that was only introduced in the Big Chapter Book series, but has been referenced every now and then. That character, as we open this up, is none other than Bonnie Brown of the Berenstain Bears. Now, quite honestly, Bonnie Brown was Now, the reason she was introduced, as I mentioned before, was to be sort of like a best friend, if not a love interest, of Brother Bear. Berenstain Bear fans, you might be saying, well, didn't Brother have a love interest in Honey Bear? Well, yeah, he did in the original 85 series, and even in the special, the Cupid Valentine special or something like that. But yes, he did. But to kind of update it a little bit and make it more modern, Mike Berenstain, along with his folks, decided if we're going to do a book for older readers, we need a character that can be aimed at older readers. And thus Bonnie was born. Bonnie is portrayed as a part-time model and actress. So in other words, when it comes to some of these Big Chapter Book stories, she's in most of them, but there are some that she's not. And the excuse as to the reason why she's not in some of them is because she's out doing her part-time modeling and acting. But when she's not, her character lives with her uncle and aunt, Squire and Lady Grizzly. Now, what's the major difference between her in the books and in the PBS series and in the first-time books? Well, it's real simple. In the PBS series, the only Bonnie character that we know of that's introduced is in the New Neighbors adaptation from the first book, the adaptation of the New Neighbors. That's the only Bonnie we know of that's introduced. But she's totally different from this one. Another situation is that she's also referenced in the first-time book series, most importantly, Funny Valentine. But overall, the biggest difference in comparison to both the Big Chapter Book series and PBS and the first-time book series is the fact that she only appears most time as a major character in the first-time book in the Big Chapter Book series. That's the biggest difference. Yes, her name is used in other areas. Like I said, her name was used in the New Neighbors adaptation on the PBS series. Her name was she was referenced in the first-time book series. The truth is, though, the biggest comparison in difference between all those three is the fact that she's a major player only in this series of books. That's it. Now, I know a lot of people that have probably read these books like I have hope to someday see her in animated form if that ever happens. Well, you can never say never around here because it just might. But right now, this is where you'll find her, only in here. And that is the major difference between the Big Chapter Book series and the PBS and the first-time book series. As I said, in the PBS series, there's a character named Bonnie, but it's not the Bonnie we know, or portrayed in this book, and she's also only referenced in the first-time book series. And really, that's all I could say. I mean, you know, besides the fact, like I mentioned, she was brought in because this was a book aimed at older readers. And overall, you know, that's probably the biggest difference in comparing this to the PBS and the first-time book series. The fact that this is the only place you find it. Up next, we're going to compare certain stories. Oh. Now for our next comparison. The stories. Wow. You talk about difference in stories when it comes to the first-time book series and the Big Chapter Book series. Excuse me, I just killed a spider in my face. I just killed it. Sorry about that, didn't mean for you to see that. But a spider came around calling down, and quite honestly, I don't like spiders. But anyway, as I was saying, the difference in stories. You talk about a huge difference in comparing some of the stories to the PBS series and the first time book series. The big chapter book series is probably the major area. You see, in these stories, they deal with a lot of the other things besides what you read in the first time book series. Let me give you a prime example. Now, if I can get to it, because like I said, I have a lot. Here. Here are some of them. Now, true, they do deal with something like this, but this is more like the fact of losing a friend. In other words, losing a pet. More specifically, what happens here is Sister Bear's pet goldfish has died. And her parents try their best to make sure she doesn't know but what they don't know is she figures it out. But this is one of the things they deal with, situations like this. Now they also deal with things kind of like the bad influence. And this introduces a character named Miranda. Basically, they're trying to show off in front of each other. They deal with stories like this, but it's not just these kind of stories. But we find out in this kind of a story that it's not the new friend's fault or sisters, it's both. And they make up for it in this story. But it's not just this story. You see, the major difference between the big chapter book series and this, well, here's a classic, Too Much TV. Who can forget this one? Huh? Do you see this being dealt with in the big chapter book series, Too Much TV? No. These are the kind of stories, compared to what you read in the big chapter book series, are only brought into these. And when it comes to the PBS series, these are most of the stories that are adapted into the cartoon. These stories. If the PBS series was still running, there's no doubt these stories as well would be adapted. But you never see a lot of big chapter book series stories being adapted, except for a few, like Female Fullback and Nerdy Nephew, but they're loosely adapted. That's the difference between the stories. These are adapted almost right to the T. Right to a T. I mean, this book, what year was this made? Let me see, I'm trying to see what year. 1984. 1984, 19 years later, it's adapted into a story right to the T. What else? Well, let's see. This one, too, is directly almost adapted right to a T. Not one thing is missed out of it. Right to a T. This was made basically 13 years before the PBS series came out. Right to a T, the episode does it. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, everything you've ever known is there. I mean, right to a T, with a few exceptions. comparisons, but right to a T. Why am I saying this? Well, like I said, when it comes to the big chapter book series, things are a lot more different. I mean, a lot more different. I mentioned the female fullback. Did I not? Yes, I did. I did mention it. Now, here's another difference in comparison. The first time book series actually deals with other things. Take a look at this. I mentioned this in one of the videos before, but take a look. They deal with situations you didn't think of. Christian books, living life, in first time book series. I mean, take a look at this. Unbelievable. But you know, these aren't the first books that have dealt with this kind of scenario, kind of situation. It's not the first time. Take a look. That's right. But like I said, the big chapter book series dealt with a lot. And like I said, there were some stories that were loosely adapted. Like in this verse, like in here, in the big chapter book series of the female fullback, the character that I mentioned earlier, Bertha Boone, wants to try out for the football team. But the coach doesn't want a female on his team until he sees what she can do. Now, how is this loosely adapted on the PBS series, you might ask? Well, it's loosely adapted because the character is replaced by a character named Betsy. But instead of wanting to be on the team, she's actually persuaded. We have brother, cousin Fred, and Tutah persuading her to join them to help them win the game. But instead she comes up with a compromise. She'll help them train and improve on what they can't do if she helps them in exchange. If they help her in exchange. So what happens is that Betsy gets Betsy practices track with brother excuse me, practices track with Betsy. Cousin Fred practices basketball, and Tutah ends up in ballet. And through all these practices with her, they find out that it's actually helped them improve. Ooh, on the day of the big game, because when they try to find Betsy, wondering why she's not in uniform, she says, "I'm not playing. What I've done is actually help you improve." And it's proven. So in other words, that's how loosely adapted PBS can do the series compared to what they do with the first 10 books. With the first 10 books. In the first 10 books, they go right to a T almost. And that is the biggest difference in comparison to all three. The fact that PBS, when it comes to a first 10 book series, will actually do them right to a T, but when it comes to the big chapter book series, they'll loosely adapt them, but they won't directly adapt them. And that is the biggest comparison. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about in comparing differences between all three is the family affairs themselves. What can you say? The Bear family basically stays the same. There are a few tweaks in twin trends here and there, but they all stay the same. For example, in the big chapter book series, the parents are a little bit more mature about certain things. Well, not a little bit more mature, but they talk about more grown-up things than anything else. And they're more protective of each other. For example, here in the New Girl in Town, when Papa comes into the house and overhears the fact that Brother has a crush on Bonnie Brown, the niece of Squire Grizzly, he's not too happy about it because at this time, when he finds out, there's a feud going on again between the Bear clan and the Grizzly clan. And he doesn't like it. Until the end, when him and Squire Grizzly finally decide just to let the cubs be with it, see each other. But, anyway, one of the other major differences is, like I said, it's not just the fact that they talk about more grown-up things. Because they deal with all sorts of different situations. They do. Now, I will give PBS and the First Time Book Series some credit. They went to directions they've never gone before. For example, in the 85 series, we never had the characters break down and cry that much. No. The 85 series is more like a comedic adventure series, if you will. Now true, the 85 series did adapt to some things from the books. They adapted The Truth, Berenstain Bears and the Truth, right to a T. They adapted The Messy Room, right to a T, and a few other stories, including, I'm trying to think what that story is. Trouble with Friends. They adapted them all. They truly did. They adapted them all. But you know what? To a T. Well, they didn't really adapt them all. They just adapted a few that I know of. Well, while the PBS series did most of it. I mean, the stories did most of it. I mean, they adapted a lot. That is true. For example, when PBS adapted some of the stories, like I mentioned, one of the stories they adapted was Too Much Pressure. Now, in a kid's series, you wouldn't expect something like this. But basically, they adapted right to a T. Well, sort of right to a T. Sort of right to a T. Basically, in the part where Mama breaks down, she's not the only one that breaks down and cries. The Cubs do in the PBS version. That's true. But here, the Cubs are more worried about her. I mean, she just starts crying, walks out of the car, walks into the house, walks upstairs, and basically falls right onto the bed and continues to cry. Now, as I said, it's loosely adapted. Now, as I say, it's one of the stories that is to a T, but sort of loosely to a T. Basically, Papa doesn't come out of the shed with his axe and say, okay, and see everybody crying and say, that's it, I'm calling everything off for today. Instead, we have Brother going into the woods to tell Papa, hey, you gotta come, it's Mama, something's wrong with Mama. Basically tells her that she's crying. He's never seen it. And Papa basically has got to explain to her. Let everybody do. Check up on things, and they find out that she stops crying because all she needed was a good cry to get all the pressure off. Basically, like I said, it's loosely adapted to a T. It's loosely adapted to a T to the point that it's something you don't normally see. It's something you don't normally see in a first-time book series or in a PBS series. But what can you expect? That is the first time ever. You gotta give them credit, like I said. You gotta give them credit. They do these things to a T. But what does that have to do with the Bear family? Well, like I said, you've never seen the Bear family in that kind of a situation, nor do you ever see them in the situations that you see them in when it comes to the big chapter book series. But overall, besides some of the situations you see them in, they stay the same. They remain the same, which is a true testament to those that write stories. And that is the biggest, and that, when it comes to differences, the only differences in comparing all three of these is the fact, is the situations they get themselves into. That's it. But as far as everything else, they remain, above all that, they remain the same. And that's all I can say about it. And I'll be back with a special message. Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm back here in closing to send out a special message to the Berenstain family. You know, I want to thank you guys for creating this series, this Berenstain Bear family, and the series of books. To me, at the age of 30, I still read them and enjoy them. I can't say that I don't, because I do. They're the kind of books that make you feel good when you have a bad time. I mean, just to read these kind of books, sit down and read these kind of books makes you feel good. Because you see that sometimes the Bear family and their friends deal with the same situations you do. Or that we all do. And that's saying a lot. I also want to give you guys credit where credit is due. True, some people may get on you about these things, but I have to give you credit for bringing Christianity, if you will, into your books. Not just with the big question, but with these books that I hold in my hand as we speak. I have to give you a lot of credit. I mean, to do that is doing something that no one thought could be done in a children's book series. Let's be honest, it should be done. Overall, I hope you guys, all I want to do is wish you guys the best in the future when you come up with new stories. Because I know there's a lot of people like myself that have some ideas as well that we would love to see made into Berenstain Bears stories. We would just love to have them made. I mean, some ideas off the top of my head are like possibly having Brother Bear going into middle school, junior high, if you will. Sister Bear maybe following as an honor student. Maybe having something there. Things like that, ideas like that. Possibly going as far as having Brother and maybe even Sister sneaking out at night to go see a movie they're not supposed to see. Things like that. And basically just how the lessons they learn from all. But again, people like me would love to see those kind of ideas put into stories. And I'm sure everybody that's a fan of yours would love to see their ideas made into stories. But overall, the reason I did this comparison is to just compare the differences between the stories you have made and how they're loosely adapted onto your animated cartoons that were made in the years, especially the PBS series. And that's all I have to say. Until next, so that's all I have to say. I want to thank you again for providing entertainment for nearly 50 years. God bless you all, and we'll talk to you all later. I want to thank everybody else for watching this video. If you're a Berenstain Bear fan, I hope you enjoy it.